The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Copper Ridge as Owen Tucker rode into town, his weathered face revealing nothing of the turmoil within him. Blood seeped from a wound in his shoulder, but the physical pain paled in comparison to what he carried in his heart, a burden heavier than the Colt revolver at his hip, or the memories that haunted his dreams. It was 1879, and the promise of a new life in Montana Territory had drawn him west after the war, but peace remained as elusive as rain in the desert. The town's single street stretched before him, lined with wooden buildings that seemed to waver in the heat like mirages. Owen guided his exhausted chestnut mare toward the only establishment showing signs of life, a saloon with peeling paint, and the ambitious name Silver Palace emblazoned across its facade. He dismounted with a grimace, the wound in his shoulder protesting the movement. 3 days of hard riding with bounty hunters on his trail had taken their toll. He hadn't stopped long enough to properly tend to the bullet graze, and now fever threatened to overtake him. Inside the saloon, conversations dimmed as the door swung open. Owen felt the weight of curious stares but kept his eyes forward as he approached the bar. The bartender, a barrel-chested man with suspicious eyes, placed a glass before him without being asked. "Passing through?" the bartender inquired, filling the glass with amber liquid. "Looking to stay," Owen replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Heard there might be work at the Campbell ranch." The bartender nodded slowly. "Old man Campbell could use the help, especially with his foreman laid up, but he doesn't take to strangers easy, not since." He trailed off, studying Owen with renewed interest. "You know how to handle cattle, grew up on a ranch in Kansas," Owen answered, the whiskey burning a trail down his throat. "Can break horses too." A woman's voice cut through the haze of his exhaustion. "Campbell Ranch is 3 miles north." "I'm heading that way myself." Owen turned to find a woman watching him from a corner table. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical braid, and unlike the other women in the saloon, she wore a simple riding skirt and jacket. Something in her direct gaze suggested she was accustomed to being heard. "Katherine Harlow," she offered, approaching the bar. "I manage the books for several businesses in the area, including the Campbell place." Owen nodded but offered nothing more than his name in return. The less people knew about him, the better. But as he attempted to stand, the room tilted dangerously and he gripped the bar for support. Katherine noticed the blood seeping through his shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he muttered, though the sweat beading on his forehead belied his words. "Stubborn fool," she said, not unkindly. "That nothing will kill you if it festers. Doc Wheeler's just down the street." Owen wanted to refuse a doctor meant questions, and questions were dangerous, but the floor seemed to be rising to meet him. The last thing he remembered was Catherine's surprisingly strong grip as she caught him before he hit the ground. He woke to the smell of carbolic acid and clean linen. Sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Doc Wheeler, an older man with silver spectacles perched on his nose, was changing the bandage on Owen's shoulder. "Good morning," the doctor said cheerfully. "That was quite a close call. The bullet didn't lodge, thankfully, but the infection was setting in. Another day and we might have been having a different conversation." Owen attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain. "How long have I been here?" "2 days. Miss Harlow brought you in, paid your bill too. That was unexpected. Where is she now?" "Probably at the Campbell ranch." "She rides out there most mornings." The doctor handed him a clean shirt. "She said to tell you Mr. Campbell still needs help if you're interested once you're back on your feet." Owen dressed carefully, his mind racing. He hadn't expected kindness, especially not from a stranger. It made him uneasy. Kindness often came with strings attached in his experience. But he needed work, and the Campbell Ranch was as good a place as any to disappear for a while. The doctor cleared his throat. "There's something else. While you were feverish, you spoke about a woman." "Your wife, I believe. If there's someone you'd like us to contact." "No," Owen cut him off sharply, the walls he'd carefully constructed around that part of his life slamming firmly back into place. There's no one. Doc Wheeler nodded, clearly sensing he'd ventured into forbidden territory. Very well. You're free to go, but take it easy for a few days, and change that bandage daily. The walk to the livery stable where his mare had been kept was enough to drain what little strength Owen had regained. The stableman eyed him dubiously, but handed over the reins without comment. The ride to the Campbell ranch took longer than it should have, with Owen stopping twice to rest. The property came into view just as the afternoon sun began its descent, a sprawling operation with a main house, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. A weathered sign reading Campbell Ranch hung from an archway over the road. As Owen approached, he spotted Katherine Harlow emerging from the main house. She shielded her eyes against the sun, watching his approach with a slight smile. "I was beginning to think you might not show," she called as he dismounted. "I pay my debts," Owen replied. "I understand I owe you for the doctor." She waved a dismissive hand. "Mr. Campbell will deduct it from your first month's wages, assuming you're still looking for work." "I am." "Then come meet him. He's been short-handed since 3 of his men left to try their luck in the gold fields." Owen followed her into the house, noting the solid construction and well-maintained appearance. Inside, the furnishings were simple but of good quality. A man in his 60s sat at a desk in what appeared to be a study, his white hair and beard neatly trimmed. He looked up as they entered, piercing blue eyes assessing Owen in one swift glance. "So this is the man you mentioned," Campbell said, rising to his feet. He was tall and still straight-backed despite his age. "You have experience with cattle?" "Yes, sir. Grew up on a ranch in Kansas, worked another in Colorado for 5 years. Can you read and write?" "Yes, sir," Campbell nodded, seemingly satisfied. "We're moving the herd to summer pasture next week. Until then, there's plenty to do around here. Bunkhouse is behind the main house. Meals are at dawn and dusk." He named a wage that was fair, if not generous. Owen accepted with a nod, and Katherine smiled, clearly pleased with the outcome. As they left the study, she led him toward the kitchen where a cook was preparing the evening meal. "Mrs. Finch, this is Owen Tucker, the new ranch hand," Katherine introduced him. "He'll be joining the men for supper." The cook, a plump woman with kind eyes, looked him over. "You look like you could use a few good meals, young man. Sit down and I'll fix you a plate now." Owen hesitated, unaccustomed to such easy acceptance. "I should see to my horse first." "Already taken care of," Katherine assured him. "One of the hands led her to the corral when we came in." Reluctantly, Owen sat at the kitchen table. Katherine joined him, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Finch. "You're not what I expected," she remarked, studying him over the rim of her cup. "What did you expect? Someone more eager to talk, perhaps?" "Most men who come through here are full of stories." Owen shrugged his good shoulder. "Not much to tell. I doubt that very much, Mr. Tucker." There was something knowing in her gaze that made him uncomfortable. "But your secrets are your own." The next few days fell into a pattern. Despite Doc Wheeler's advice to take it easy, Owen threw himself into work, helping to repair fences and tend to the livestock. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the thoughts that plagued him at night. Katherine came to the ranch most days, working in the office with Mr. Campbell. Occasionally, she would ride out to where the men were working, often bringing water or messages. Each time, her eyes would find Owen, and he would feel the weight of her unasked questions. On the 5th day, as Owen was shoeing a horse in the barn, Katherine appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Campbell wants to speak with you," she said. "He's impressed with your work." Owen followed her to the main house, where Campbell was waiting on the porch. "Tucker," the older man greeted him, "I've decided you'll be riding point when we move the herd next week. Johnson's still recovering from that fall, and you've shown you know what you're doing." "I appreciate the opportunity, sir," Campbell nodded. "Katherine will be coming along to help with supplies. She rides better than most men I know and has a good head in a crisis." Owen glanced at her, surprised. "It's a rough trail." "I've made the trip every season for 5 years, Mr. Tucker," she replied with a hint of amusement. "I believe I can manage," Campbell chuckled. Don't let her fool you. Miss Harlow here came west with nothing but determination and has built herself a respectable business. She's as tough as they come. A flush of color touched Catherine's cheeks at the praise. Mr. Campbell exaggerates, but I am capable, I assure you. That evening, Owen found himself alone in the barn, checking tack that would be used for the cattle drive. The door creaked open and Katherine entered, carrying a lantern. "I thought I might find you here," she said. "You work later than the others." Owen continued inspecting a saddle. "There's a lot to do before the drive." She set the lantern down on a barrel and approached. "Your shoulder seems to be healing well." "Well enough," Katherine sighed. "You don't make conversation easy, do you? Never saw much point in talking just to fill silence." "And yet sometimes words need to be said." She touched his arm lightly, causing him to finally look at her. "The nightmares you have, the ones that wake you shouting in the bunkhouse there about her, aren't they? Your wife," Owen stiffened, pulling away from her touch. "That's not something I discuss." "You don't have to," Katherine said softly. "I knew her kind." The statement struck him like a physical blow. "You don't know anything about her." "Perhaps not specifically, but I recognize the shadow she's cast over you." Catherine's eyes held no judgment, only a quiet understanding that was somehow worse than condemnation. Some wounds don't heal because we keep them open ourselves. Owen turned away, his hands gripping the saddle until his knuckles whitened. "With all due respect, Miss Harlow, you're overstepping." "Probably," she agreed, "but sometimes an outsider sees clearer than those closest to the pain." She picked up her lantern. "Good night, Mr. Tucker." After she left, Owen remained in the barn for a long time, her words echoing in his mind. It had been 3 years since Sarah's death, yet he carried the guilt as fresh as the day it happened. No one in Copper Ridge knew his story, how his wife had died because of his choices, how he'd fled east afterward, unable to face the consequences of his actions. The cattle drive began at dawn the following week. 60 head of cattle would be moved to summer pasture 30 miles north, a journey expected to take 4 days. Owen rode at the front of the herd, while Katherine traveled alongside the chuck wagon driven by Mrs. Finch. The first day passed without incident, the cattle moving at a steady pace across the rolling Montana landscape. As they made camp for the night, Owen found himself watching Katherine as she helped prepare the evening meal, laughing with Mrs. Finch as though the arduous journey were nothing more than a pleasant outing. After dinner, as the men sat around the fire sharing stories, Owen drifted to the edge of camp. He'd never been comfortable with the camaraderie that seemed to come naturally to others. To his surprise, Katherine followed, offering him a cup of coffee. "You should get some rest," he told her. "Tomorrow's stretch has rough terrain." "I'm not tired yet." She settled beside him on a fallen log. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Above them, the sky was ablaze with stars, more brilliant than any city dweller could imagine. Owen had to admit it was spectacular. "I came west after my husband died," Katherine said suddenly. "Everyone thought I was mad to leave Boston, but I couldn't bear to stay where every street, every room held memories of him." Owen glanced at her, surprised by the voluntary confession. "How long were you married?" 2 years. Thomas was a good man, kind, steady. He died of pneumonia in 73. She stared into her coffee. "I was 24, a widow with no children and no desire to remarry just to secure my future, so I came west, where a woman might make her own way if she had wit and will enough." "And you do," Owen observed. "Have both, I mean," she smiled. "I've had to develop them." "The West isn't kind to the unprepared." "No," he agreed, thinking of his own journey. "It isn't." "Your turn," Katherine prompted gently. Owen was silent for so long she must have thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah and I married young. I was 20, she was 18. We had a small place in Colorado. I was gone a lot, working cattle drives for extra money." He paused, the memories rising like ghosts. "There was trouble with rustlers. I killed a man protecting our neighbor's herd. His brother swore revenge." Katherine remained silent, her presence steady beside him. I should have moved us away then, but I was stubborn, thought I could protect her. His voice grew rough. I was wrong. They came while I was checking fence lines by the time I got back. He couldn't finish. It wasn't your fault, Katherine said softly. Wasn't it? I made an enemy and left her vulnerable. You couldn't have known. Owen shook his head. A man's supposed to protect what's his. I failed, and you've been punishing yourself ever since. It wasn't a question. Is that why you keep moving? Why you're so reluctant to connect with anyone? He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. The next day, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain. Campbell pushed the herd harder, hoping to reach a sheltered valley before the storm hit. They were crossing a shallow river when the first lightning struck, spooking the lead steer. In moments, the entire herd was in danger of stampeding. Owen reacted instantly, spurring his horse to head off the frightened animals. Katherine, who had been riding nearby, joined him without hesitation, helping to turn the cattle back toward the intended path. Rain began to fall in sheets, making visibility poor and the ground treacherous. As they finally managed to calm the herd, Owen saw Katherine's horse slip on the muddy riverbank. She went down hard, disappearing beneath the churning water. Without thought, he plunged in after her, fighting the current until he reached her struggling form. Together they made it to shore, both soaked and gasping. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, checking her for injuries. "Just bruised," she managed between coughs, "and wounded pride." Relief made him momentarily forget his usual reserve, and he pulled her against him in a brief, fierce embrace. "Don't scare me like that again." She looked up at him, rain streaming down her face, and something shifted between them. Owen became acutely aware of how close she was, of the warmth of her despite her wet clothes, of the way her eyes widened as she recognized the change in him. The moment was broken by Campbell calling their names. They separated quickly, turning to assure him they were both unharmed. That night, they made camp in the shelter of a rock formation. The cattle were restless after the day's excitement, requiring extra hands to keep watch. Owen volunteered for the first shift, grateful for the excuse to avoid the confines of the camp where Katherine's presence had become a distraction he couldn't afford. But sleep eluded him even after his watch ended. He lay awake, staring at the canvas above him, aware that just a few yards away, Katherine too might be lying awake. The realization that he cared what happened to her, that the thought of her being hurt had terrified him, was unwelcome. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. The next morning brought clear skies and the revelation that Katherine's horse had injured a leg in the fall and couldn't continue. Without discussion, Owen adjusted his saddle to accommodate her behind him. The arrangement forced a proximity that set his nerves on edge, her arms around his waist a constant reminder of what he'd tried to deny. "You're as tense as a cornered cougar," she observed as they rode. "I don't bite, you know." Despite himself, Owen smiled. "Could have fooled me." She laughed, the sound carrying on the breeze. "Only when provoked." They reached the summer pasture by mid-afternoon on the fourth day. The area was lush with grass and sheltered by hills that would provide protection from the worst of the weather. A small line cabin stood ready for occasional use by the cowboys who would check on the herd throughout the season. As the men set about settling the cattle, Katherine and Mrs. Finch prepared a celebratory meal. The successful drive called for something special, and they had saved provisions for just this purpose. That evening, as they ate around the fire, one of the younger cowboys produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the air. To Owen's surprise, Mr. Campbell asked Katherine to dance, and she accepted with a grace that spoke of a genteel upbringing far removed from the rugged Montana landscape. Owen watched her move from partner to partner, her face animated in a way he hadn't seen before. When finally she stood before him, hand extended in invitation, he shook his head. "I don't dance, Miss Harlow." "Everyone can dance, Mr. Tucker. Some just need the right partner." Her smile was a challenge he found himself unable to refuse. Awkwardly, he took her hand and allowed her to lead him into the circle of dancers. His movements were stiff at first, but Catherine's patience and the rhythm of the music gradually eased his tension. By the time the song ended, he had almost begun to enjoy himself. "See," she said, slightly breathless. "Not so terrible, was it?" Before he could answer, Campbell announced it was time to turn in. They would start the journey back to the ranch at first light. The return trip was faster without the cattle to manage. They made camp just once, expecting to reach the ranch by the following afternoon. That night, Owen found Katherine sitting alone by the dying fire long after the others had retired. "You should get some sleep," he said, settling beside her, says the man who barely sleeps at all. She glanced at him. The nightmares, are they less frequent now? He considered denying it, but there seemed little point in lying. "Yes, I'm glad." She poked at the embers with a stick, sending sparks swirling upward. "When Thomas died, I dreamed of him every night for months. Always the same dream, him calling my name, me unable to reach him. It nearly drove me mad. What changed? Time and purpose. I found that having work that mattered, people who depended on me, made it easier to face each day." She looked at him directly. "The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of you rather than all of you." Owen was silent, absorbing her words. "I've been running for 3 years, he finally admitted. Telling myself it was to stay ahead of the men who might still be hunting me, but really, I was running from myself. And now I'm tired of running." Catherine's hand found his in the darkness. "Then stay. Copper Ridge could use a man like you. The ranch needs you." "And what about you?" The question surprised them both. She didn't look away. "I think you know the answer to that." They returned to the ranch the next day to find a stranger waiting, a U.S. Marshal named Davies. Owen tensed at the sight of the badge, but the marshal's business wasn't with him. "Katherine Harlow?" The marshal approached as they dismounted. "I've been trying to track you down." "You're a difficult woman to find." Katherine straightened. "What can I do for you, Marshal?" "I have news regarding the Bradford case." He glanced around at the curious onlookers. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Owen watched as Katherine led the marshal into the main house, a feeling of dread settling in his stomach. He knew little about her business dealings, but the appearance of a U.S. Marshal couldn't be good news. Despite his instinct to distance himself, he found he couldn't simply walk away, not when she might be in trouble. He was waiting on the porch when they emerged an hour later. Katherine's face was pale, but there was a resolute set to her jaw that suggested whatever news the marshal had brought, she was determined to face it head-on. After the marshal departed, Owen approached her. "Everything all right?" "Yes and no." She sighed, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "When I first came west, I worked as a bookkeeper for a man named Bradford. He owned several businesses in Helena, including a bank. I discovered he was embezzling from his investors and reported him to the authorities. And the marshal. Bradford is dead, shot during an attempted robbery in Wyoming." She shook her head. "All this time I've been looking over my shoulder, afraid he might seek revenge for my testimony, and now—" "You're free," Owen finished for her. "Yes." Katherine looked at him with a faint smile. "It seems we both have ghosts that no longer need chasing." That evening, Owen found her on the small bridge that crossed the creek behind the main house. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, turning the water to liquid fire. "Mr. Campbell offered me the foreman position," he told her, leaning against the railing beside her. "Johnson's decided to move to California to be near his daughter. Will you accept?" "I'm considering it," Katherine nodded, her gaze on the water below. "It would mean putting down roots." "That thought used to terrify me." Owen turned to face her. "Now I find I'm more afraid of moving on." She looked up at him, hope and wariness mingled in her expression. "What's changed?" "You know what's changed, Katherine." He rarely used her given name, and it felt intimate on his tongue. "You helped me see that I've been punishing myself for something I couldn't control. That Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living because she died." "She wouldn't have," Katherine agreed softly. "When you fell in the river," Owen continued, "I realized I cared what happened to you. That scared me more than any gunslinger or rustler ever could. Caring isn't a weakness, Owen. No, but it is a risk. He took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt. When I think I'm finally ready to take, Catherine's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. It's about time. 3 months later, Owen stood in the same spot, watching as Catherine approached in a simple white dress, wildflowers in her hair. Mr. Campbell waited to perform the ceremony, Mrs. Finch dabbing at her eyes beside him. The ranch hands had cleaned up for the occasion, their usual work clothes replaced with their Sunday best. As Catherine reached him, Owen felt a sense of peace he'd thought was forever beyond his reach. The past wouldn't disappear. Sarah would always be a part of his story, as Thomas was part of Catherine's. But the future stretched before them, no longer something to fear but a promise waiting to be fulfilled. "Ready," Catherine whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. Owen squeezed her hand. "Ready." As they spoke their vows beside the creek where they'd first acknowledged their feelings, Owen Tucker realized he had finally stopped running. In Copper Ridge with Catherine, he had found not just a place to hide but a place to heal, a place to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. And when, a year later, their daughter was born, a strong, lunged, red-faced miracle they named Hope, Owen knew that some stories don't end with tragedy, even when they begin that way. Some stories take unexpected turns toward joy, if only you're brave enough to follow the path.